Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Criminal Caleb. Today I have about 1 million weird news criminal stories for you. But in the first segment, we're actually going to start out with the weirdest of the news, including drones that made it rain cannabis over Tel Aviv. They would fly over Tel Aviv and drop bags of weed. And after a few more weird news stories, we will jump into the crimes, including a man who stole $300,000 worth of peanuts, as well as the dark tale of a man who was driving a pink ice cream truck as he was pursued through city streets by police. Along the way, we have a few more weird news stories, including a cruise ship that sank with 6,000 cows on it. Not something I should be laughing at, except for the fact that it's funny. So we will get to that and more. Then in the fourth and final segment, I will give you my top 10 dumbest people to have ever entered a courtroom. Many quite hilarious and quite unbelievable true stories. But for now, we are of course going to start with the drone that made it rain cannabis, with hundreds of bags that it dropped on Tel Aviv. This occurred on September 3rd in the Israeli city of the Rabin Square in Tel Aviv. It was mid-afternoon and people were preparing for the Sabbath when a drone drove by and dropped hundreds of cannabis bags in the town square. Many onlookers were said to be confused, all the others were said to be massively excited as they rushed to score as many cannabis bags as they could carry. According to the Jerusalem Post, quote, "The public was ecstatic when the bags of green cannabis fell from the sky into Tel Aviv, courtesy of the, quote, green drone." Just practicing my news voice. Apparently the drone was being operated by a Telegram group which actually pushes for the legalization of the psychotropic drug in Israel. On each bag of cannabis from the company was a statement which read, quote, "It's time, my dear brothers. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's the green drone handing out free cannabis from the sky. Enjoy, my beloved brothers. This is your pilot brother making sure we all get some free love." The message also said that this operation was in fact part of the group's public declaration of a new delivery system called Reign of Cannabis. Many people suspect that they were influenced by Amazon's desire to use drones to deliver packages in the future. Quote, "We are launching the Reign of Cannabis project that will include a weekly delivery to different parts of the country of 1 kilo of cannabis divided into free 2-gram, 7-ounce bags." That does not sound correct. Let me Google that real quick. Sure enough, 2 grams is actually 0.07 ounces. So if you're actually interested in this product, I would contact them and make sure you know what amount of weed you will be getting. Anyway, the people behind this operation also spoke about the imminent threat of a lockdown imposed by government forces, so they are also kind of an activist group, and they are aiming to curb the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, giving their take that it, quote, "requires thinking outside the box and coming up with new ways of getting cannabis to consumers." So say what you will about COVID-19 pandemic, at least we now have hippie Jews giving out cannabis drones. Everything has its upsides. However, the joy did not last too long. Apparently, the police quickly followed the incident with a report that it had arrested 2 suspects in their 30s who allegedly controlled the drone that flew over the square. The authorities went on to say that the distribute operations of a substance suspected as dangerous by them is illegal, The arrested suspects will be interrogated and are potentially subject to additional punitive measures. Of course, this gained an immense amount of lashback, as most countries are now more cannabis-friendly than ever. Of course, many have legalized it, and there are still many that continue to exercise harsh restrictions on the drug and consider it a threat to public well-being. As for Israel itself, recreational smoking pot is not legal, but of course medical is. So if you really need some weed, take the great Norm Macdonald's advice, go to your doctor and let him know that Tuesdays make you sad. Okay, next story. Flat earthers end up in quarantine after sailing to the, quote, end of the world. So this all began when an Italian couple was trying to make it to Lampedusa. My weekly mispronunciation of the week. Because they thought Lampedusa is the end of the world, and they are flat earthers. Now let me preface this by saying I don't really care too much for ragging on flat earthers. I do believe they are wrong, but it's not the fact that they're wrong that they bug me, it's the fact that they care so much that the earth is flat. It's basically a religion for them. I just find it incredibly funny. So keep in mind as I laugh at them during this story that I'm not laughing at them because of their stupidity. I am in fact laughing at their theocratic devotion to their stupidity. Which of course I have a unique right to do due to my own stupidity. Okay. So after the unique events of 2020 put a stop to the planned flat earther cruise to Antarctica, where passengers would hope to find a giant wall of ice they believed surrounds the flat disk of a planet we inhabit, one Italian couple took matters into their own hands. The Italian man and woman set sail towards Lampedusa, an island between Sicily and North Africa, in order to find the, quote, end of the world, which they believed is near the Sicilian island. Now, this is where the story really falls apart for me. They live in Venice, Italy, and they believe that the end of the world is near Sicily, Italy, which are only about 550 miles apart, so for American reference, that's like between San Diego and San Francisco, California. They believed that they lived only that distance from the edge of the flat earth, which is surrounded by a giant wall of ice. And they were so sure of this that they actually sold their car in order to buy a boat, in order to sail around the island of Sicily, in order to make it to Lampedusa, which in the last decade has become a common transit point for migrants and refugees taking initiative in trying to make the treacherous journey from Africa to Europe across the Mediterranean Sea. The reason this is important is because all of these migrants usually have next to no resources, and yet they can still usually make it into Europe. Meanwhile, this duo with a boat and modern mapping technology could not make it to the one island they wanted to. Unfortunately, the Flat Earther duo ended up instead on Ustica, an island situated just northwest of where they set off. So instead of going south, they went northwest. A doctor at the Maritime Health Office of the Ministry of Health, who helped the couple after they got lost, revealed that they were using a compass in order to navigate. This, he said, presented a problem. Quote, "The funny thing is that they orient themselves with a compass, an instrument that works on the basis of terrestrial magnetism, a principle that they, as flat earthers, should reject." Now, I know this guy's smart, he's a doctor, but this is in direct contradiction with my flat earth research. I read all 42 books of Discworld, and I believe a compass is used multiple times in that series, with no problems at all. Anyways, the couple were taken into quarantine on Ustica before they tried to escape. They ended up being taken back into quarantine, and then trying and failing to escape again. After they had decided to stay put and fulfill their requirement in quarantine, the couple abandoned their doomed boat and took a ferry back to mainland Italy. Saddest of all, this is said to be a major setback for the flat earther community, who is widely mocked for their belief that Earth is flat and not, as has widely been accepted, round. I'm glad the article points that out. I hope this article in general, though, does get shared a lot more, because I've been trying to pitch a TV show for years where you give a group of flat earthers like 50 grand or something just to prove that the earth is flat. They can spend the 50 grand however they want, and the episode just follows them trying to prove the earth is flat with all of their vast monetary resources we have provided them. I think it would be the funniest reality TV show ever. But that is it for the Flat Earthers of this week. We are now moving on to a man in Nebraska who brought the pressing issue of boneless chicken wings to his city council. This man, this brave individual, looked at the social, political, and economic landscape of 2020, and he decided that now is the right time for him to advocate for an issue near and dear to his heart and the heart of his fellow Americans: our worryingly widespread acceptance of the term boneless chicken wings. If you have a spare 2 minutes in your life ever, you owe it to yourself to go online and watch the video of this brave man going to his city council meeting in Lincoln, Nebraska, where he's come before local government to argue his case. He tells the council that he's identified a serious problem and proposes that we, quote, as a city, remove the name boneless wings from our menus and from our hearts. There's a loud murmur in the room, but he presses on, asking for his time to be respected while he outlines his objective. Quote, nothing about a boneless chicken wing actually comes from the wing of a chicken. Boneless chicken wings are just chicken tenders, which are already boneless. As a result, the world's children are being raised not to accept the important fact that meat grows on bones. The entire time this man tries to present his viewpoint, a woman behind him laughs hysterically. Still, he perseveres, suggesting that Lincoln renames boneless chicken wings to buffalo-style chicken tenders, or wet tenders, or saucy nugs, or trash. He concludes his final statements and receives a universal round of applause from the councilmen before one of them says, quote, for the record, that is my son. It is so heartwarming to see a father be so proud of his son, who managed to rise above being an individual into the collective representation of the average Americans. I don't know, chicken nomenclature authority. You should, in all reality, go online and watch this video. It is quite entertaining, especially because in the very beginning, somebody immediately starts laughing out loud at him. He turns around and he just basically yells at this individual who's laughing at his ridiculous statement. Of course, the man is just trolling, and hopefully he will inspire more people to do so. Alright, time for our next story. The mini Buckingham Palace mobile home is now taking reservations. Now I know you're excited. Of course, this is the result of Buckingham Palace being temporarily closed as a result of COVID-19, which has left a niche in the market to be fulfilled, and now we have a mobile home that aims to do so. The, quote, Royal Caravan is a Buckingham Palace-themed vacation home located in Britain's resort town of Scarborough. This 840-square-foot trailer sleeps up to 4 guests and features golden toilets, chandeliers in every room, and gold and red velvet thrones. It even has golden dog bowls. So they are not joking around at all. If you really want to live like Queen Elizabeth II, why not send in a reservation to stay in this mobile palace? All right, that's it for this segment. Stay tuned to the next segment, where I will give you a story about 6,000 cows who went missing after a ship sank in a storm-tossed sea off the shore of Japan. The boat was carrying 6,000 cows for some reason, and it sank. It's going to be quite hilarious. Stay tuned for that.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to jump into some crime stories in a few minutes, but first we're going to talk about 42 crew members and 6,000 cows who all went missing after a ship sinks in a storm-tossed sea off the coast of Japan. The boat capsized after hitting a typhoon, and according to one crew member, who is the only known survived member, all other crew members drowned, and the 6,000 cattle on board were not to be seen. The boat was en route to New Zealand from China and issued a distress call early last Wednesday morning, just west of Japan's Omami Oshima Island. As a result of the distress call, Japanese Coast Guard responded, although they were not able to find the vessel due to the fact that there was a major typhoon, which classified as a powerful Category 4 storm. Authorities have since passed the area where the ship went missing, and the weather for the ongoing search is fine. Japanese Coast Guard regional spokesman Yuichiro Hagashi said, according to the Associated Press, that the 450-foot livestock carrier built in 2002 had a crew of 43 members, of which 39 are from the Philippines, 2 are from New Zealand, and 2 from Australia. You can go online and look at pictures of the actual vessel that sank. It is quite impressive. It's basically just one giant livestock container. As for the lone crew member who survived the ordeal, he was a 45-year-old chief officer from the Philippines, and he was plucked from the water Wednesday night after being spotted by a Japanese Navy P-3C surveillance aircraft. No wreckage from the ship has been found as of yet, according to the same Coast Guard. The survivor told rescuers that the vessel lost an engine and then capsized when it was hit broadside by a wave. The crew was then ordered to don life jackets, but the man said that he abandoned ship and did not see any other crew members in the water after the ship sank. As previously mentioned, during the ordeal, about 6,000 cattle disappeared into the depths of the ocean, and following the accident, New Zealand's Ministry for Primary Industry said that it was temporarily suspending new cattle livestock export applications pending an investigation. They, quote, want to understand what happened on the sailing of the Gulf Livestock 1, which is the name of the ship. According to similar reports, there have been about a dozen reports of cattle ships disappearing over the past decade, with death tolls in the tens of thousands. In November of last year alone, a livestock carrier loaded with more than 14,000 sheep experienced a, quote, maneuvering issue. Due to that, they capsized not far from the actual wharf it departed from. And out of the 14,000 sheep, only a couple hundred were rescued. In a similar event in 2016, 3,000 sheep died aboard a vessel that caught fire and then sank in rough waters off the coast of Somalia. But none of these hold a candle to an accident that happened about a quarter of a century ago, when 67,000 sheep died aboard a vessel after it caught fire and was abandoned by its crew east of the Seychelles, which is a country in East Africa. And similar to the story I just told you, all but one crew member survived. Death is so sad. Speaking of catching fire, police search for a man they say caught fire after torching another man's car. Alright, back to the funny story. So police are searching for the man who set another man's car ablaze on North Carolina. at a convenience store. Detectives say the arson suspect, who has been nicknamed Smokey because he got caught on fire. He was apparently upset that he didn't get the help he wanted from a driver, so he set the man's car on fire. Police say the man in question asked a customer at the Circle K store if they had a car jack, and when the customer said no, the man was not happy with that answer, so he proceeded to pour an accelerant on the car and set it on fire. Quote, there was no altercation. All the victim stated to the suspect was that he didn't have a car jack. It's unknown why the suspect committed the act he did. Several people who frequent the convenience store, including its owner and its typical operators, say that they will be on the alert until they see the man, as he is a regular in the area, and they predict that he will be caught fairly quickly. However, he is not universally hated in this area. One person said, quote, that's pretty brave to just go up to somebody's car and just be spraying it. It's like he didn't have any regard for life, even his own. So he's actually garnered admiration from some individuals. However, I think the more relatable quote is this one. Quote, wow, oh, he set himself on fire? He's stupid. He's crazy. This crime actually occurred last month, and the man has still not been caught. So if you have any information and you're looking for $1,000, why not call your police station and let them know where this arsonist is? Now, you can actually go online and watch the video of the man setting the other guy's car on fire. Obviously, extraordinarily entertaining, especially the part where he throws his little gas can and the trail of gas that spills from it leads to his leg that catches on fire, which he doesn't realize is on fire until about 20 seconds later. Then he starts to panic, then he runs, and he deserves it, which is why it's funny. Please go watch it. You will be entertained. Detectives bust a thief for stealing nearly $300,000 worth of pistachios. Which really isn't that much. That's about 4 pounds of pistachios. So stupid expensive. Detectives busted what they described as a, quote, elaborate scheme involving the theft of almost $300,000 worth of pistachios and a pair of stolen tractor trailers. Detectives were called early last week to the Seton Pistachio Company, where employees reported a significant theft of its packaged nuts. The workers went on to say that somebody had used the name of a real trucking company to get the go-ahead to pick up 2 tractor trailers worth of pistachios from the company. But instead of fulfilling the delivery order, the pseudo-drivers took all $294,000 worth of nuts to an abandoned property, shook all of the pistachios out of the packages, and then sold them to an unsuspecting individual in the Madria County area. The, quote, nut thieves were eventually located because of the semi-truck and the 2 trailers they swiped from a company in Fresno, which had in it a real-time GPS. The detectives, the trucking company owner, and 4 other law enforcement agencies were able to track down one of the suspects, who was a 23-year-old Fresno man who was also arrested at his home and is facing charges of conspiracy, grand theft, identity theft, and looting. The officers who made that arrest say that they expect to make additional arrests in the coming days, and perhaps most importantly, the cops were able to recover both trailers and all the pistachios. Although, who knows what will happen with those innocent nuts? Nobody knows. Seton Pistachios, who was the victim of this theft, describes itself as the second largest pistachio processor in the United States. According to its website, it can process more than 110 million pounds of pistachios thanks to its more than 10,000 acres of planted nuts. Unfortunately, however, they have not found the other remaining robbers in this case. So if you know anybody who has recently stolen $300,000 worth of nuts, please call your local law enforcement. All right. Speaking of law enforcement, an Australian custom official destroys a $19,000 handbag while searching through it. So this all began when a shopper learned that her expensive lesson of bringing a $19,000 alligator-skinned handbag to customs officials while trying to travel requires a correct import license. The officials called her out on it, and when she could not provide the appropriate paperwork, the bag was destroyed. The woman had bought the alligator bag from a boutique store in France, where she had spent 26,000 Australian dollars on it. Good gravy, that is a lot for a handbag. And she actually was slightly prepared. She did get together an export license from Europe. However, she did not get the import license from Australia. As a result, the department said that it would confiscate the bag. However, it decided not to take any further action against the buyer. The Minister for the Environment of Australia said, quote, "We all need to be aware of what we are purchasing online, as restricting the trade of animal products is crucial to the long-term survival of endangered species. Australia does and will closely monitor what comes into and out of the country." Her assistant went on to say, "Our country looks out for illegally imported items including fashion, accessories, tourist trinkets, furs, and taxidermy animals and ivory." And of course they take their wildlife trade offensive very seriously, as in Australia they can punish people with up to 10 years in prison, as well as a $222,000 fine. Good lord. Time for our next story. A man has been arrested after a pink ice cream van was pursued through city streets by police, following reports that it had been stolen. This event took place in Nottinghamshire, who has been featured on this show many times before, when police caught up with the brightly colored vehicle on the A52. The officers tried to pull over the van, which was emblazoned with a super whippy sign on the vehicle. Quote, "It wasn't too difficult for us to spot a pink ice cream van being driven in the middle of the night." Beyond that, the vehicle was also covered in painted cartoon characters, which was eventually brought to a halt. They eventually arrested a 22-year-old man who was incarcerated on suspicion of dangerous driving, driving without insurance, and theft of a van. One of the inspectors on the scene said, "Clearly, this was an unusual getaway vehicle, and it wasn't too difficult for officers to spot a pink ice cream van being driven in the middle of the night. Although it's a criminal tale, this is someone's livelihood, and a crime like this could have a devastating impact. I am glad we've been able to return the van quickly and hopefully minimize the disturbance to its owner." Alright, not a whole lot of time left in this segment, but just enough time for our Florida story of the week, in which a Florida man spent his coronavirus relief money on a 40-foot boat. This is according to prosecutors, as the 35-year-old Miami business owner, who received more than $2 million in coronavirus relief funds, used about a third of that money to purchase his new boat and other goodies. This is not the first time I've featured a story like this on our show. In fact, I think it's the third time. which really nails down the point that this is largely the fault of the government, who's just handing out $2 million and not watching where it goes to. Because this loan was handed out in April, and it wasn't until last Wednesday, at the end of August, when the federal charge of making a false statement to a lending institution came down on the individual. Thankfully, however, the man now faces up to 30 years in federal prison, and prosecutors are claiming that the man said he would only use funds to be used for business-related purposes, such as retaining workers and paying bills. Of course, after receiving the money, the man spent about $700,000 on a 40-foot boat, which he even registered in his own name. Usually when people do these kinds of crimes, they register it under the company banner. Alright, that's it for that story, and that's it for this segment. Stay tuned to the next segment, where I will go over some more crime stories, as well as a gigantic 50-meter deep crater that was discovered in the Arctic tundra. That's the kind of nerdy stories that interest me. And then at the very end of the next segment, we will go over some sexual weird news stories. including including one in which a study occurred that determined that pornography does not affect sexual satisfaction or mental well-being. So we'll go over that one, as well as several, crazier sex stories. So if you're into that, why don't you stay tuned, by God?
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. I'm going to start with my goddamn last crime story of the week, in which a man made 135 bogus ambulance calls because he, quote, needed a chat. The man called the NHS 111 service 135 times during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, saying that he, quote, often gets lonely. I relate, brother. The 64-year-old man pleaded guilty in court on September 4th to persistently making use of a public communication network to cause annoyance, inconvenience, and anxiety. I like how annoyance is the problem, not the fact that he was, taking up a health line, busying them up while they could be, saving lives. No, it's the annoyance. He also admitted his consistent failure to comply with a community protection notice issued on November 2019, where he was told only to call for genuine emergencies. On 5 occasions between January 1st and April 24th this year, the man failed to comply with the notice by refusing treatment and becoming verbally abusive to paramedics after he had called 111 and they told him to get off the line. In 1 month alone between March and April, the man called 111 96 times, which is about 3 times per day. Even though the man admitted to all charges, his prosecutor went on to say that the man caused significant disruptions to NHS staff at the time of immense pressure on the service. He went on to say, quote, a frequent caller clinician has put together an estimate of what Mr. Blank has cost the East of England ambulance service between May 2019 and May 2020, in which he made 187 calls, resulting in avoidable hospital conveyance on 10 separate occasions. This has cost the service over 15,000 euros. One individual, however, found fit to defend the man, saying that he called the ambulance service, quote, because he was lonely and just needed to chat. Mr. Blank does have a heart problem, but there are some underlying issues which the probation service can delve into to see whether we can help him put a stop to this kind of behavior. The judge presiding over the event said that she wanted to postpone sentencing until she had, quote, found out more about the man, and she will be ruling out a custodial sentence. The man in question spoke out at the end of the trial, saying, quote, I apologize, okay? I promise I'll comply with everything you've asked. I kind of feel bad for him, the poor 64-year-old man. Just needs a friend. He ended up costing the NHS 15,000 euros, though. I mean, come on, buddy, just pay me 15,000 euros. I'll be your friend. Alright, next story. A giant new 50-meter deep crater opens up in the Arctic tundra. Of course, this is the latest to be seen in the northern Siberia since the phenomenon was first registered in 2014. The hole was initially spotted by an air vessel who was hosting a TV crew. They sent out a group of scientists who then made an expedition to examine the large cylindrical crater, which has a depth of up to 50 meters. Goodness gracious. You should go online and take a look at this. It's fairly impressive. If you can't tell, I'm very easily impressed, but it is a cool hole. It's like the size of a baseball field, and apparently about as deep as 1.5 football fields. Pretty odd that it just popped up out of nowhere. These funnels are actually believed to be caused by the buildup of methane gas in pockets of thawing permafrost under the surface. The leading researcher of the expedition made to the crater said that it was, quote, "What we saw today is striking in its size and grandeur. These are colossal forces of nature that create such objects." He went on to say, quote, "This object is unique. It carries a lot of additional scientific information which I am not yet ready to disclose. This is a subject for scientific publications. We have to analyze all of this and build three-dimensional models." Build three-dimensional models of a hole. That's funny. Okay. As previously mentioned, the doctor went on to explain how the craters appear because of a, quote, "gas-saturated cavities which form in the permafrost." He goes on to say, "In a literal sense, a void space filled with gas with high pressure. The covering layer distends, the thickness of which is 10 to 15 meters approximately." So basically an explosion causes swelling in the dirt below frozen dirt, and then when the frozen dirt melts, the highly pressurized gas builds up under it until it pops. Like a frosty, stinky land bubble. Alright, time for the weird news sex stories of the week. I only have 3 of them. One of them is a study, and 2 of them are women taking revenge on men through sexual means. Through pretty violent means. So if you're into that kind of thing, stay tuned. It's kind of gross, but also kind of funny. In an incredibly horrific way. We're going to start out with the more tame of the 3. The new study that suggests that online pornography does not affect sexual satisfaction or mental well-being. Of course, this is contrary to previous literature. The basic purpose of the study was to discover whether or not the use of online pornography does or does not negatively impact evaluations of the self or others. Of course, as the use of online sexual explicit material has grown, so has the concern over its influence on mental well-being. Despite the increased interest, scientific conclusions remain inconsistent. Some studies actually have reported an association between online sexual explicit material and negative outcomes. That is the generally accepted belief. Many people also believe that there is a reduction in body satisfaction, increased sexist attitudes, and reduced sexual satisfaction. Many studies also have outlined positive outcomes like improved sexual satisfaction, which is actually the opposite of the other studies. Long story short, it's completely unclear. In an attempt to clarify the relationship between online sexually explicit material use and mental health outcomes, a scientist and her team wanted to explore the topic through the lens of the differential susceptibility to media effects model. So to explain what that is, she says, quote, "One of the central propositions of this model is the notion of media effects being indirect, that individual response states, such as cognitive appraisals of the media, mediate the relationship between media exposure and effects. As a result, one variable that may influence an individual's susceptibility to the media is perceived realism." So that's if you watch a porno with a cop and Batman or something, then you'll begin to believe that that is how real sex works, if you are not experiencing it on a constant base. And therefore the authors examined perceived realism as a potential mediator in their study. The results showed that 79% of respondents have used pornography in the past 3 months, and 85% have used it in their lifetime, and 15% are liars. The interesting thing comes when 80% of people reported that they believe that the sex portrayed in the media is said to be unrealistic or somewhat unrealistic. And therefore the researchers concluded, quote, these results arguably provide some evidence that the correlation between sexually explicit media and unrealistic expectations may not be as pervasive or significant as some literature would have us believe. In our sample, there was little association between online sexual explicit media use and important evaluations on oneself. So basically, in conclusion, if you know that the goofy stuff you're watching is goofy, you don't have to worry about it being goofy. Alright, let's get to the interesting stories. Now, these do involve a bit of women mutilating their male partners. So just a slightly explicit warning here. We will also be mentioning the actual terminology used for the genitalia. So if you're not into that, why don't you skip ahead about 5 minutes and I will give you my top 10 dumbest people to ever enter a courtroom. But for now, we're going to jump in to a woman who was sentenced to jail after she bit her hubby's private parts off. The man in question was a 52-year-old who is now nursing a serious wound on his private parts after his wife allegedly savagely bit it off. Why did she do this? Because the man refused to kill a rat that was in her room. Apparently the man picked a quarrel with his wife, who was a 40-year-old, over a rodent which was pestering her in her room. The man said that when his wife had gone to drink and that when she gone home to return... Goodness gracious, that doesn't make any sense. Let me translate this into English. Let's see, his wife had gone out to drink and then she returned home and asked the man if he could remove a rat in her room. The man said that although they are technically married, they are in fact on separation, but they live in the same house in separate rooms, and therefore did not think it was his responsibility to kill the rat. Now, this is the saddest part of this story. That's where it ends. Oh my gosh, there's a giant gap missing between the non-death of the rat and the missing genitalia of the man. But here we are. Time to move on to the next story. A woman who was sentenced to jail after she glued her vagina to frame her ex-boyfriend. So this has to be one of the most bizarre stories I've ever done during this entire Weird News podcast hosting program. And surprisingly enough, it does not come out of Florida. It comes from Spain, where a woman has been sentenced to 10 years in prison after she glued her own private parts together in a bid to frame her ex-boyfriend for the crime. She also accused him of kidnapping her outside her home and later abandoning her while semi-naked after squeezing the superglue into her private parts. This lie began to fall apart when investigators uncovered CCTV footage from a Chinese-run supermarket showing the lady buying the glue and a, quote, kidnapping kit, including knives that she used to harm herself. Why is this Chinese-run supermarket selling a kidnapping kit? Possibly not something that should be on the market. But anyways, beyond this, not only did she buy a kidnapping kit, it was also discovered that no vehicles, save for a council bin lorry, passed the area she claimed to have been assaulted and tortured. Which means she was never kidnapped. In the black car, which she said picked her up. As a result, the Spanish city of Leon convicted her of 2 counts of making up a crime and jailed her for 10 years. In popular media, she is now known as the, quote, glue liar. She was also ordered to pay her ex 25,000 euros in compensation. Prior to her lies being discovered, the 36-year-old had spent days in prison. Alright, that is it for this story, and that is it for this segment. Stay tuned to the next one, where I'll give you my top 10 dumbest people to ever enter a courtroom. It will be fantastic in all the hilarious ways that fantasticness can be held. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to dive right into my 10 dumbest people to ever enter a courtroom. Starting off with an individual who was on trial for shoplifting at a Walmart. He was quite boastful in the fact that he thought he was certain to get off. He even told his lawyer that there was no evidence against him, and he definitely did not steal anything. The problem was, at the time he was arrested, he was not only caught in possession of the stolen goods, but those stolen goods happened to match a list. What list? A list in his pocket at the time of the arrest, entitled Stuff to Steal from Walmart. Which goes to prove that just planning ahead is not enough to pull off a successful robbery. Alright, number 9. This is a pretty short one, and it's really a statement on perseverance, in my opinion, as well as courage. A defendant walked into a courtroom wearing a shirt that said, quote, "Smoke weed every day." The only problem was, he was attending his drug trafficking and possession trial. Perhaps this was a calculated move, but I always tend to assume incompetence. Alright, number 8. There aren't too many details for this one, but it's still hilarious. This occurred when a victim was on a stand and was asked if she could identify the person who savagely attacked her. She scanned the courtroom and seemed confused. It is sad to say that she was likely suffering from some lingering mental destruction as a result of the attack. It is said that during this, the defendant's lawyer smiled, realizing that he was about to get his client off scot-free. His smile quickly turned to horror, however, when he glanced over at his client, who had helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for the victim to identify him. The man was then sentenced to several years in prison, and it is said that the lady fully recovered eventually. Alright, number 7. This all began with a DUI charge, and the client's lawyer told the man that he had a good chance of getting out of his DUI. At the preliminary hearing, the district attorney played a video for the court that was recording on the scene from the police car. When the police officer went to give him the breathalyzer test, the client said, "I'm too drunk to use this damn thing." So that came from the police's body cam. Quite hilarious. You can go online and actually watch the footage of this. As somebody who likes alcohol, I feel properly represented by the video. Alright, number 6. So, this is just a voice message that was left by a judge's assistant for a lawyer. It's quote, "Hi attorney, this is Janet from the judge's chambers. Your client, who I see is charged with leaving harassing phone calls to his ex-girlfriend, left us 87 voicemails over the weekend. The judge would like to have a word with you." So apparently this nice young lady, Janet, received multiple harassing phone calls from the man who was accused of leaving multiple harassing phone calls to his ex-girlfriend. The funny thing was that as much as this seems to be damning evidence, it actually could not be used in the court. But the man still ended up being convicted. Alright, number 5. So this began with a drug possession charge, which I don't believe should be a crime. Nevertheless, I do think this guy is an idiot. So this guy showed up to his court appearance, and like all people, he had to go through a metal detector. When he emptied his pockets, he put all of his belongings into a tray prior to sending it through the metal detector. The only major problem was he had a bag of weed in his pocket, and he placed it on the same tray with his other belongings. This, in tandem, gave him his second arrest for drug possession on the spot, and he had to miss his other court hearing. Alright, number 4. It is said that this one began with procrastination. The defendant hadn't hired a lawyer and was unprepared for his trial, and so, in an effort to delay his court hearing, he intentionally crapped his pants. But the judge didn't care and proceeded with the trial anyway. And as a result, the defendant was convicted and sent to jail with soiled pants. Nice, short, not so sweet, but there you have it. Number 3. And this one's actually number 3 and number 2 because I'm lazy and they're very similar. So the number 3, we're going to go with natural-born killers. A guy walked in to his court hearing and he decided to wear a shirt that said natural-born killer on it. Apparently he didn't think that this would be a factor in his hearing for his assault charge. Believe it or not, being a natural-born killer is similar to being an assaulter. And number 2, very similar, of course. A man showed up to his preliminary hearing for a domestic violence charge. He was wearing a ratty t-shirt, and his lawyer didn't pay much attention to it. The judge asked the attorney if he had spoken with his client about his courtroom appearance. The lawyer looked at the man's shirt and realized that his client was wearing something that said, quote, "I have the dick, so I make the rules." Obviously a moron, and as a result, he went to prison. Not as a result of the shirt, you're not allowed to do that. But it is said that he got locked away for his assault charges. Alright. Number 1. A defendant was accused of robbing a bank, and he had a bail hearing, and the judge explained to him that the court could post $10,000 in cash to be released up until the date of the trial. When the judge asked him if he had $10,000 for bail, the defendant answered back, quote, "Judge, if I had $10,000, would I have needed to rob a bank?" This is said to have been the quickest conviction ever without the person admitting it, as even after he said this dumb quote, he refused to admit to his guilt. Alright, that's it for this GSMC Weird News podcast, and I will thank you for listening to it. And I'm also gonna ask you to please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please like, share, leave a comment, leave a goddamn review on iTunes. That would be fantastic. It really helps us a lot. Thank you, and have a good night.